Hello, everyone. Josh Tapp here again, and welcome back to The Lucky Titan. Today, we're here with Dr. Demartini. This is an interview I've been looking forward to for many, many weeks. When his team first reached out to me, I was looking at this interview saying this is going to be probably one of the best interviews we're going to have on this show. Bringing this guy on, if you haven't heard of him, I mean, he's written 40 books. He's been translated in over 39 languages. He's spoken in over 299 countries. 299 different disciplines across multiple different countries. Very excited to have him here to discuss the Demartini method, which is one that I believe will be very beneficial to all of us as entrepreneurs. So Dr. Demartini, thank you for coming on today. We're excited to have you here.
Well, thank you. I was looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
I'm glad we got our time zones together. I'm floating around, so the time zones had to be coordinated.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm grateful it worked out. I mean, so for those of you who don't know, he's currently sitting on a boat going clear across. Is it the Atlantic you're going across right now, heading to London? So he's taking a multi-day
Madeira. I'm going to Madeira. I'm headed to Madeira and then Gibraltar, then Cadiz, Spain, and then off into the Mediterranean.
So the big question here is, are you married, Dr. Demartini?
I was. My wife passed away.
Oh,
so I'm single. My girlfriend was just here with me. She just left and just landed in Istanbul yesterday. So she just left.
I was just curious about that. Because I know my wife, if I was gone for a week, she'd be like, why am I not on that boat with you? But I'm excited.
Just here.
Excited to see that you're on your way, and I appreciate you coming in at a late time. It sounds like you're in the evening time where you're at currently. So I want to kick this though off, Dr. Demartini, about really kind of that pivotal moment for you when you realized that the industry you're in is the industry that you wanted to pursue, because there's thousands of different industries that you could have pursued, but why the psychology sector?
Well, I was, when I was very, very young, a year and a half old, I ended up with a speech impediment and had to go to a speech pathologist from age 1.5 to probably 4. I also had an arm and leg deformity and had to wear braces on my left arm and leg.
Wow.
I was told in first grade I would never be able to read, write, communicate, probably never go very far in life, not to amount to much. But after 4, I got out of my braces and I wanted to run everywhere. So my teacher said, look, he's not going to be able to read and write or speak properly, but he likes to run. So put him into sports, at least have some place he can excel.
Yeah.
So I ended up eventually dropping out of school, picked up the surfing kick in Texas, which wasn't the surf capital.
Yeah.
At 13, I left home. 14, I hitchhiked from Texas to California and down into Mexico. 15, I made it to Hawaii to surf. And I lived on the North Shore and surfed there. I lived at Eokai Beach Park. First, I lived under a bridge, then in a park bench, then in a bathroom, then in an abandoned car, but lived at Eokai and surfed and rode big waves gradually. Nearly died at 17. And luckily was found by a woman in my tent after being unconscious for 3.5 days.
Oh, wow.
She led me to a little health food store. That led me to a yoga class, which I can't imagine how that would have happened, but it just happened. And there was a guest speaker named Paul Bragg, who inspired me one night to believe that I could someday become intelligent, overcome my learning problems and speaking problems, and learn how to read.
Wow.
I never had read a book from cover to cover until age 18. And that night, after hearing him speak, I had tears in my eyes, and I saw, I guess you could say, a vision of what I would love to do. And I really, really, really wanted to be intelligent. I didn't want to have to wear a dunce cap like I had in first grade.
Yeah.
And I had a dream that I could eventually overcome my learning problems, be intelligent enough to be able to share ideas and speak properly and become a teacher. So that started November 18th, 1972,
Wow.
that night. And I had a dream to overcome those obstacles And I am just as inspired today as that moment about what I did to do.
That is,
So that's where it started.
yeah.
Now that led me back to eventually California. I flew back to California, hitchhiked back to Texas, eventually took a GED, high school equivalency test, miraculously passed this thing, tried to go back to school, failed, and I got a 27 on a test that I needed a 72 to pass. I came home crying, thinking what my first grade teacher had said. And my mom found me on the living room floor and she said, "What's wrong, son? What happened to you?" I said, "I blew the test. I guess I don't have what it takes. I guess I'll never read, write, or communicate, or amount of thing, never go very far." I just requoted what the teacher had said. She didn't know what to say. And she, in that moment, did what only a mom could do. She put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "Son, whether you become a great teacher and travel the world like you dream, whether you go back to Hawaii and ride giant waves like you've done, or you return to the streets and panhandle as a kid on the streets like you've done, I just want to let you know your father and I are going to love you no matter what you do." When she said that, my hand went into a fist. I looked up and I saw the vision I saw the night I met Paul Bragg, of me standing in front of 1 million people speaking. And I said to myself, I'm going to master this thing called reading and studying and learning. I'm going to master this thing called teaching and education. And I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to travel whatever distance. I'm going to pay whatever price to give my service of love across this planet. I'm not going to let any human being on this face of this earth, not even myself, stop me. I hugged my mom. I went in the room. I got a dictionary out. I started memorizing a dictionary. And she and I worked on 30 words a day, spelling, pronouncing, using them in a sentence, get the meaning. And I did that relentlessly, a minimum of 30 words a day until my vocabulary was strong enough to go back and finish and try to go back to school and pass. And I did. And then I excelled. And I was more determined than most of the kids. They were just going there because they had to go to college. I just wanted to learn. I wanted to read. It was meaningful to me. So my career as an individual in human behavior started as a pursuit to want to overcome my challenges, master my own life through exemplification, and help other people do the same. So that's where it started. And that's 50 years ago, coming up November.
Wow.
So I've been doing it that long. So I started my teaching career at age 18, and my learning started, and I learned that if I told people what I just learned, it accelerated my learning. So I started teaching and reading and learning. And that led to speaking. And I also went into health field, and that also led to consulting and then business consulting, because I built a very viable, very quickly business. And that has led me around the world to speak now in 170 countries around the world.
It's fantastic. But what I love about your story is there were key players, right? And key moments, which I feel like everybody has those. I can't remember if it was in your book or another one I read, but people, it's kind of what your mother was telling you, right? Is that you have a choice, right? I think you wrote about this, but there was a doctor and a prison inmate who were both, they were brothers, and they were asked the same question of, why are you where you're at now? And they both said, it's because I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. My parents, I lived with my grandma. I was raised that way. And they both blamed their success or their failure on the exact same set of circumstances. Can't remember if you were the one who wrote that or not, but I was so impressed by that story, because I know for myself, I had a very similar story to that, and it helped me feel a lot more inspired to step out and become more. And with your story, obviously, it's 50 years of it, right? It's proven that the methodology has been proven. And so my question to you with that is, with your going into the psychology field, what guided you into wanting to go and teach this instead of just saying, hey, I'm going to be a psychologist who works in the field and creates a business like every other psychologist? Like, why'd you end up deciding to go speaking?
I think the speech impediment, and because speaking allows you to leverage and reach more people.
Yeah.
One-on-one, one on group, one on radio, one on television. Writing also, because writing allows me to, I've written for 1,530 different magazines around the world.
Wow.
So I write voluminously. And anything that allows me to get a message out, I do.
Yeah.
So every vehicle that has been found and I'm aware of, I incorporate.
Love that.
To reach people around the world. I have been relentless in that, 7 days a week, because it's the mission that I feel that I'm on.
Yeah.
And I got clear about that and refined it more fully as I went along. I read it and refined it. My mission statement, I started in 1972, and I've read it and refined it and read it and refined it 80 times. It's been polished 80 times. And so I'm really clear about what I've committed to, and I just do it every day. I don't distract myself by things. I just stay focused on what I love doing. It's easy because I've delegated everything else. I always say that anything that's not absolutely inspiring to, delegate. So I delegate everything else except teach, research, and write. I don't have anything else to do. I haven't driven a car in 32 years. I haven't cooked since I was 24. Anything that is lower on your values that you do devalues you.
Yeah.
And anything that's highest on your hierarchy of values inspires you. So teaching, researching, and writing is what inspires me. So if I want to live an inspired life, I delegate the rest of it. I don't do those other things. I surround myself with people that are experts in those areas, and they take care of that for me.
Well, what I love about that is that you took what was the weakness, turned it into the reason why, which has then become your strength. I think that's so amazing. It's funny. I have an employee here who he had a similar story to where people were telling him he was dumb when he was a kid. Oh, he'll never learn. He's, teachers constantly telling him how dumb he was and putting him in the special classes. But he's one of our best team members, right? And he's highly intelligent. He just hasn't been told that until now. And he's becoming way more successful because people are willing to support him, and help him become more successful. So I love to see that happen more, because I know for myself, I never felt intelligent either. And I had to make that decision for myself to say, you know what, I'm going to overcome this. I'm going to overcome my fear of speaking and my introverted nature and start a podcast, right? Many of the other things that we've done. So when it comes to the Demartini method, right? What's the big problem and like story change that you're making for your clients? What are you trying to help them accomplish?
Oh boy, that's quite a variety, because we have over 1,000 different issues that people have been able to help with that method.
Right.
So there's a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe if I developed it and gave some insight on the method, then it might make sense out of it.
Yeah, please do.
Every human being, regardless of age, gender spectrum, or culture, lives moment by moment by a set of priorities, a set of values, things that are most to least important in their life. And whatever's highest on that list is intrinsic, and they spontaneously are inspired to act and fulfill it. Like a boy who loves video games, he doesn't need to be motivated to do his video game.
Right.
But as you go down the list of values, they become more extrinsic as you go down. And it requires more extrinsic motivation, reward if you do it, punishment if you don't, in order to sustain action. So anytime an individual is living by lower values, they're less efficient. And they're requiring extrinsic motivation. And motivation is a symptom of not prioritizing your life if you need it. Inspiration is an intrinsic yearning to fulfill something deeply meaningful. So the first step is that every human being has that. And anything with their perceptions that they perceive support that, they open up to. their pulvinar nuclei and their thalamus gatekeeps and filters their sensory infinity and allows whatever comes in to go through it. And anything that supports the values, it goes up into the cortex to become conscious. And anything that challenges it, this top of the reticular activating system shuts it off and tries to protect from it. So we have a filtering mechanism, and anything that's not fulfilling that value goes down into the amygdala, and we avoid it and seek its opposite. And these are the sources of our distractions. All distractions that people face in any of the primary areas of life, their intellectual pursuit, their business pursuit, their economic pursuit, their relationship pursuit, their social leadership pursuit, their health, fitness pursuit, their spiritual pursuit. Any distraction they face is something that they're either infatuated with or something they resent, something that they have a subjective bias where they're conscious of the upsides and unconscious of the downsides, or conscious of the downsides, unconscious of the upsides. And they have a skewed, subjectively biased interpretation of their reality. But anything that fits the highest value filters in and allows you to see both sides objectively. We have an amygdala, which is a subcortical area, which is involved in survival, and it wants to avoid predator and seek prey. So it's designed to have subjective biases to accelerate adrenaline to be able to seek prey and avoid predator. And we have the executive function, the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in objectivity, reason, a balanced objective, mitigating risks, strategic planning, inspired vision, executing plans, and self-governance. So the path of mastery, the path of empowerment, you might say, is living by priority. If we don't fill our day with high priority actions that inspire us, our day fills up with low priority distractions that don't. And the low priority distractions that don't cause those impulses and instincts, which are distractions, as a feedback to let us know we're not living by priority. And whatever's highest on our value, our identity revolves around. Whatever's highest on our value, our purpose evolves around. And whatever's highest on our value, our epistemological learning maximizes in that area. So identifying that is crucial for the path of mastery, path of empowerment for individuals, whether they be business or raising a family or being leaders and senators or whatever I may work with. Now, the Demartini method is a method designed to hone that and to dissolve distractions, to maximize intense focus so you can build momentum, building a brand that's intrinsic, that magnetizes through exemplification naturally right people that match that are synchronously aligned to that. So it's a series of questions that make you conscious of what is unconscious, so you can be fully conscious objectively of what's happening around you, instead of letting your subjective biases make you seek or avoid with distractions. So it's a science of being accountable to what is truly most important to you, to extract meaning out of your daily life, and to see the hidden order in the apparent chaos. So, because whoever can see the hidden order is the one that's able to give order and be the leader. Whoever lives by priority most efficiently ends up rising to the top. Gary Keller talked about the one thing. That one thing is that highest priority, and identifying it. On my website, drdemartini.com, I have a complimentary private value determination process, which I've distilled over 44 years to help people discern what is really important to them according to what their life demonstrates, not by the fantasies that they may be emerging in their minds because of comparison of other people they admire. Many people live with shoulds and ought tos and supposed tos and got tos and have tos and musts and need tos, imperatives, subordinating to outer authorities that they fantasize that they want to be like, instead of identifying what is truly intrinsically a calling inside that they want to bring to the world. And that is where they excel. And that is where they are more objective. And that is where they have sustainable fair exchange and transactions with people. Because when you're down in your amygdala, you tend to be narcissistic, looking down on people, or altruistic, looking up at people. And you try to get something for nothing or give something for nothing, and you're in immediate gratification, which undermines entrepreneurial development. So getting people, the Demartini method is a science of getting people into their most authentic, most integral, most prioritized, undistracted state of being to help them master their pursuit that they become clear on in their mind. And it's a very profound method I've been working on for almost 50 years.
Is yeah, beautiful. First off, I love the methodology because it's really getting to the root of the problem. As you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking about myself and about the problems of a lot of the people who listen to the show, and we often get distracted by the shiny object syndrome, chasing different business pursuits, or that altruistic behavior, like you're saying, looking up at other people, saying, oh, maybe I could be like that person. And we tend to almost worship these influencer type people. And then it also is reflected in our hiring decisions and everything that we do as well. And it's interesting because as you're saying this, I'm going to go through your program because I think it'll be very beneficial for us. But I'm curious with the way that you have been leveraging this in your own life, because as you said, you haven't driven a car for, what was it, 20 some odd years, right? And
32 years.
32 years, yeah. Let alone all the other things that you're taking off your plate. I think most people would look at that and say, oh, well, that's you can do that because you have a lot of money. Would you speak to that as far as how you start with this methodology without having to
It's
have
just in
buzzwords?
reverse. I have a lot of money because I did that.
I love that. I love it.
I'd like to address money if I can, if that's appropriate.
Please do. Yeah, that is appropriate. Let's go for it.
I was speaking in 2013 in Johannesburg at the convention center, Sandton Convention Center. There's about 5,000 people there. There's a convention there. I was the opening speaker. Richard Branson was the final speaker. And I asked people, because it was an entrepreneur, business success, financial kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked, how many of you would love to be financially independent? And 5,000 people put their hands up. Probably 4,000 put the other hand up, and probably another 1,000 put their, the same people put their foot up. So they rallied, they roared.
Yeah.
And I said, fantastic. Now, how many of you are financially independent? And boy, it got quiet, solemn all of a sudden. Where your passive income is exceeding your active income and you're working only because you love to, not because you have to. And all went down except for 7 hands. Now, if I'm speaking to a group of executives, that's a higher percentage for sure, because that's majority. Yeah. But just a general audience at a big rally. And I said, now, would you like to know why less than 1% of the world's population obtain it, and yet 100% of the people fantasize about it? And it got their attention. And I said, it's very simple. The hierarchy of your values dictates your financial destiny. Tell me what you value, I'll tell you where your money's going. Then I said to him, I want you to get a piece of paper out. And on this piece of paper, I'm going to give you 60 seconds. I've just deposited 10 million US dollars into your bank account. You have 60 seconds to decide how you're going to spend it. And you have 10 choices you have to decide. What are the 10 things you would do with $10 million? You have 60 seconds to quickly write them on this piece of paper. On your mark, get set, go. And quickly they rattled off the 10 things they would do with that $10 million. I said, time's up. Hand it to the person to the right. And do your best at calculating the individual you just received it from your left on. Calculate how much of the $10 million they had is left in assets that can grow economically. And 20 to 80% was the average in that room that they had spent it on consumable depreciables. I get that car, get that house, get that trip, buy that boat, get those clothes, buy that ring. So I explained to them that as long as you have a higher value on consumables that depreciate and don't have a value on buying assets that appreciate, you'll be working for money most of your life as a slave instead of having mastery over the money and have it work for you. Because unless you put money into something that goes up in value, wealthy people buy things that go up in value, poor people buy things that go down in value. I said, and your hierarchy of values dictates every perception, decision, and action you take. Every decision you make is based on what you believe will give the greatest advantage over disadvantage in that moment based on the data you're seeing, you're perceiving. So you just now faced your reality by what you wrote. And if you don't have a higher value and that percentage is not higher than what you've got, you're going to keep spending your money. The second you get it, you're going to spend it on things that go down. So what you're really saying when you say, I want financial independence, what you're really having in your mind is, I want the lifestyle of the rich and famous. Yeah. I want to spend money. But a lot of people, even in the celebrity world, which I've had the opportunity to work with many of them have money coming in, but it's going out as fast, if not faster than it's coming in. And some are bankrupt. Yeah. I mean, they make 100 million, 200, 300, 400 million and have no money. So it's not a matter of how much you make, it's how you manage what you make, and the hierarchy of your values dictates how you manage it. And when you manage it wisely, you receive more to manage. And if you manage it unwisely, it goes into other people's hands. Money circulates through the economy from those who value it least to those who value it most, automatically. So the first thing that people need to do is, it's not how much you make, it's how you manage it. Now, I worked with a gentleman who had an income of $6.27 million a year, which is a darn good income. Yeah. That's his gross income. That's not his personal income, that's his gross income to his business. He's a doctor. But he asked me to consult with him when I got with him. He had this fancy house, fancy yacht in the back, fancy cars, fancy clothes, fancy artwork, fancy this, fancy that, yard work, everything. But he had to borrow $329,000 that year to pay his taxes. He had no organization around his money. And the irony is, he had an assistant working for him that was saving 20% of her income, making only a small percentage of what he made. I mean, it wasn't even in 6 digits. But she was closer to financial independence than he will ever be with his hierarchy of values. So an entrepreneur, their values are going to dictate how they manage their money. And something I learned from the Book of Wealth by Hubert L. Bancroft, if they don't have a very extremely high value on serving ever greater numbers of people and truly contributing, not altruistically where it's sacrificed, but in sustainable fair exchange manners with ever greater numbers of people, and don't care enough about humanity to find out what the true needs are, not the assumptions presumed and projected, but the actual needs of the people, where they're actually having a demand to buy, a demand, then they really don't care about human beings. Wealthy people care about human beings.
Love that.
They go and find what the people need, and they find the problem. When people live by their highest values, they pursue challenges that inspire them, which wakes up creativity, innovation, original ideas, and genius. And they love solving problems. And the greatest problems to solve are ones that fulfill the needs as the dominant buying mode of the human being. So the entrepreneur who cares enough about humanity to find out what the need is, and cares enough about himself or herself to find where it overlaps what is most meaningful and inspiring and highest on their value, now they can't wait to get up in the morning and be of service, and people can't wait to get the service. And you found your niche. So you can't inject the values of some authority. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, envy is ignorance and imitation is suicide. You can't subordinate to somebody else and go, oh, I fantasize about being like them, I want to do what they do. Because if your heart and soul is not in it, and it's not really deeply meaningful to you, you won't sustain and endure the challenges you face. And if you don't really truly meet somebody's needs and you're narcissistic and project assumptions onto them, you're not going to meet the needs, and you're going to be pushing uphill trying to advertise and market yourself to sell. So nature forces authenticity within you and forces authentic caring about other people, ultimately in the long-term development of a business.
Well, and you've mentioned a few times within there, and I appreciate sharing that methodology. I mean, you mentioned the values, right? And the values dictating. And what I've learned, from like Jack Welch, for example, right? He talks about values within a company, and he's like, values are what you are, not what you wish to be, right? And so my curiosity is, from an entrepreneurial perspective, is there even a way to change those values? Because I mean, you did that exercise with all of those people who are, these are my values. How are you helping people to bridge that gap? Because they have to change who they are at a core level in order to actually change the values, it sounds like.
Okay, so here's the thing. You have two choices. You can set goals that match your current values to have fulfillment, or you can change your values to match the goals that you have to have fulfillment. But unless they're congruent, there's an incongruency there between what you're saying you want, what you value. That doesn't work. That's self-defeating. So many people, instead of pursuing fantasies of trying to live outside their own values and living in other people's values, which is futile, I give them a choice. I said, you can calm down your fantasy and get real about what your life demonstrates, and get real. And your depression will go down. Your self-depreciation will go down. Or we can change your values. What would you prefer? I give an option, or sometimes both, depending on what more than one different objective. Now, values are changing through your life. And there's two theories and models of changing those values. One is what they call a gradual hypothesis, and the other is a punctate cataclysmic hypothesis. Sometimes an individual's values can change cataclysmically by a death of a child, a marriage, COVID, a bankruptcy, an illness, a cataclysmic event that changes and makes you have a shift in values. And what that means is now you have a new associations in the brain of positive negatives associated with the actions that you're doing. And there's others, it's gradual. People who live by their highest values and delegate things usually do the gradual approach. People who live by lower values and are burnt out or bored with what they do end up usually having to hit bottom with cataclysmic change. So I first find out what their values are. We then start getting them in priority according to it, so they're more resilient and adaptable. And then we start stacking up new associations in the brain on the actions that are proven to work to get a result. There are certain actions that people do that increase the probability of building wealth. There's certain actions that increase the probability of building health. Certain actions that increase the probability of having sustainable relationships. In your mind, if you're not doing them, you're associating more drawbacks and benefits at them. That's why they're being deleted. So if we go in there and identify the very precise actions that are proven to work, because the achievements leave their marks and their clues. If we identify them and link by asking, what is the advantage of doing this action? If we stack up enough advantages, once the advantages are over and above what you're currently doing with your actions, you'll shift neuroplastically your pathway and actions to go in that direction. It's a Skinner operant conditioning or Pavlovian conditioning by association. I've developed a whole science around that. I've trained it in corporates and consultants and governments and you name it. But there's a second layer. You may not want to sacrifice what's currently valuable to you in order to raise something higher on your values. So you may not want to sacrifice your family to have your wealth. You may not want to sacrifice your work routine or exercise to have your health. So in addition to stacking up general benefits, we also stack up specific links. How specifically are doing these actions going to help you fulfill your current exercise program? How's it going to help you in your relationship? How's it going to help you in your health arena? If the brain sees the association and it sees it on the way, it incorporates it. And so that's called supertasking, not multitasking. Any action in any area of your life that you can link to what your current highest value is, you're able to incorporate it spontaneously without having to be motivated. Motivation is a symptom, never a solution for maximizing performance. Many people get confused about external motivation, thinking that's the solution to keep things driven. And that's willpower, determination. That's not where it's at. Spontaneous, inspired action. The child who loves his video games doesn't need willpower. He loves his video games. I was having dinner with a gentleman who founded a very significant company that was international, had 297,000 clients of major corporations around the world inside his company. Very wealthy billionaire. We were having lunch at a French restaurant across from the Four Seasons in Sydney, Australia one night. And he said, I started my company in 1951, but I've never worked a day in my life. Ever since I found out what I really love doing, I feel like I dance every day. Yes, he has challenges. Yes, those things pop in and out, but he learned to delegate. He learned to do what he loved, and he was inspired by it, and he couldn't wait to go to work. He's now in his 90s, mid 90s, still doing it. He doesn't age. Because when you're doing something that you're present with, when a human being is really present, they don't age. But when they're sitting there distracted with memories that are painful and imaginations that are fanciful, they create entropy, the arrow of time in their mind, and age themselves. And then they end up, running into resistance instead of the flow. When you're, as Peter Lynch said in his One Up on Wall Street, something that was right on the money, after he does his technical and quantitative analysis on business, he goes actually to the company headquarters and visits before he starts to buy stock on the company. He wants to meet the people factor. And he says, I'm looking for a certain set of things. People, are they grateful for their job? Are they loving what they're doing? Are they inspired by the vision? Are they enthusiastically working? Are they certain about their specialty? And are they present when they're doing it? If I see that, I know I can invest money into it. I know that's going to appreciate value. Immanuel Kant called those the transcendentals. They transcend the normal behaviors of polarity that most people are trapped in. Great leaders manage paradoxes, and most people are oscillating in paradoxes volatilely instead of actually being centered and poised and present and purposeful and empowered and prioritized, down the path, you might say. And that's what the Demartini method is for. The Demartini method is a science of how to center that individual and clarify that mission that they're really called to do. Whatever's highest on an individual's values, their mission path. Aristotle called that highest value the telos, the end in mind. It was called the chief aim by Napoleon Hill. Ed Tullison, one of my mentors at 20, called it the primary objective. But whatever that is, the study of that was called teleology, which is the study of meaning and purpose. The most meaningful, the most inspiring, the most fulfilling, the most purposeful thing a human being can do is to fulfill what is most intrinsically calling them in their life. Theologians called it the calling. Some called it the métier of a purpose. That is something that makes a person unstoppable. And that is the thing that allows them to create incremental momentum building actions like the domino effect that's unstoppable in creating something. And people, when they see authentic people, they want to do business with them. They have integrity. And they magnetize, because of exemplifying what's possible as a human being, they magnetize people to them. And they draw in what another gentleman, Jim Parker, called the naturally right. Or Walter Haley called the natural existing economic relationships, naturally existing work relationships. And that's when you get the right people on the bus, as Collins would say. This is where you're in the zone. And this is something that's trainable and something that's reproducible. So I'm interested in that. That's the reason I put this methodology and the value information together, because there is a science to it. It can be trained. It can be taught, and a person can master it. It's a methodical system.
I love that. And I hope people will look at that and say, okay, can I actually leverage this in what I'm doing today? And honestly, I don't think you could get through this interview without having that. I'm jotting notes over here. Like, these are things I need to be working on. Right. And I'm going to go buy the book right after this too. So I hope everybody will go check out. So it's drdemartini.com. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So make sure you head to drdemartini.com, go check those things out. And then Dr. Demartini, before we hop off here, I just wanted to ask you a final question just to kind of wrap up this interview, because you've shared so much value with everyone, and I really appreciate your wisdom that you've brought. But do you mind sharing, just, this is something you've kind of been saying throughout this entire conversation, is kind of like a subtext, but what's the difference between seeing and perceiving to you?
Seeing and perceiving?
Yeah.
Your eyes have receptors, photoreceptors, rods and cones for night and day and color, that pick up electromagnetic wavelengths in nanometer ranges and create what they call a transduction of electromagnetism into a gradual potential, gradated potential, and eventually an action potential, a nerve. And once it goes into the ganglion cells and goes into the suprachiasmatic nucleus and goes into the genu and goes into eventually the occipital cortex, as it's doing that, it's going into what is called interneurons. You have sensory neurons, interneurons, and then motor neurons for response. Once it goes into the interneurons and becomes associated with all the experiences you've had previously, it's now called a perception. It's a reception, it's transduction, it's interassociation, and that begins the perception. So sight becomes a perception once it passes from reception into the interneurons. And all the associative area of the brain, there's 6 associated areas in the occipital cortex for visual. And when information goes in there, as it goes from the primary cortex, which just takes in the information, it starts associated with all the experiences you've had in your life. And you can make a hell out of it or a heaven out of it. The same stimulus could be turned into a heaven or a hell, as John Milton, the poet, said, by the previous experiences stored in the subconscious mind, which are previous associations that have never been balanced. And so you can change a perception. And that's where my method comes in. I can ask questions to make you conscious of information you were unconscious of, balance it out. And once I balance it out, the forebrain takes that information and maximizes its action spontaneously instead of reaction. The amygdala is involved in survival reactions. And that's usually, as Warren Buffett says, until you can manage your emotions, don't expect to manage money. And Robert Greene says, until you can manage your emotions, don't expect to add a leadership position. If you're not in your executive center and you're down in your amygdala, you're going to be extrinsically driven instead of intrinsically called. And the person who can act regardless of outer circumstances leads the way. Whoever has the most certainty leads the way. So a sight can be turned into a perception by those associations. And that's the difference. And you have control over perceptions, decisions, and actions. You don't have control over your eyes picking up the data, but you can interpret that data and decide what to do with that data. And that's what you have control over.
Love that. And I would hope everybody would look at that and say, what is my current perception or my current believed reality, as it sounds like what you're trying to explain here, Dr. Demartini. But I would hope that people would be able to say, how do I change my perceptions? How do I change my values? I would highly recommend you all go check out the Demartini method for that reason.
Yeah, there is a science to this. It has nothing to do with what happens to you on the outside. It has everything to do with how you decide to perceive it, decide with it, what to do with it, and act on it. One of the greatest questions, there's 7 questions I love asking people in business. What is it you would absolutely love to do in life? How can you get absolutely handsomely paid to do it, or beautifully paid to do it if you're a woman? How can you make millions doing it, billions doing it? What are the highest priority actions I can do today to make that happen? Start acting on it. You can't take action steps towards your objectives without getting closer to that outcome. What obstacles might I run into? How do I solve in advance? By foresight, not hindsight. What worked? What didn't work today? How do I do what I'm doing more effectively and efficiently tomorrow? And how did, no matter what happened today, how is it helping me get one step closer to this objective? Those are great questions. The quality of your life space and the quality of the questions asked. Most people ask, how do I can afford to do this? And they get in debt. Instead of how can I be paid handsomely to do that? So they get into profit. I don't know if I have the time, but can I share a little exercise that helped me scale up a business when I was 27 years old that really made a difference?
Yeah, that would be huge. Go for it.
I started out with one little assistant. I started out in an office practice at one time, 1982. I was doing everything, overwhelmed, spent 10 years towards college once I learned to get back in college to do this specialty. And my specialty was on neurology in the brain at the time and spine. And what's interesting is I realized I was overwhelmed by doing low priority things. I was majoring in minors and minoring in majors. So I went to a Walden's bookstore, which was a chain at the time, and got a book called The Time Trap by Alec McKinsey. Still available. I read that, dog-eared it, underlined it, and summarized it. And I put a sheet of paper together, an 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper. I took a ruler and I drew 5 lines on it to make 6 equal space columns. In the first column, I wrote down every action that I take in a daily basis over a 3-month period. I wrote down everything that I did, that I could think of that I do, and not broad, vague generalities and things like marketing, too vague. I wrote down every single action step I did moment by moment through the day. Answering the phone, doing this, doing papers, writing a letter, researching this, whatever. I wrote down every action I did. And I divided it into professional and personal, work and home. And as I did that, I was already gleaning insights on the realization that I'm definitely doing things that aren't really the most important, but I'm doing them. When I got through that list, in the second column, I wrote down how much does that action produce per hour? And I did the best extrapolation I could to the best of my ability, because some were very clear. I knew exactly what they were, and others were vague. And I had to take portions of a job that made a certain thing and put that little portion and estimate it. And I put the exact dollar it earned. And I found out a whole lot of stuff I was doing wasn't earning anything, which meant I wasn't serving anybody. I wasn't doing something that served somebody that they would be willing to pay for. When I got through that list, I found out that me going out and sharing a message and speaking to people was the most productive thing I could do, because I could generate new clients from that and expose and leverage myself. The second thing was the actual clinical work that I was doing with people and consulting with people. And the third turned out to be training other people and delegating things. And I went down the list, and it was $15,000 an hour down to 0. And I prioritized that whole list. In the next column, I wrote down on a 1 to 10 scale, how much meaning does each of those actions have? 10 meaning I'm absolutely inspired, I love it. 1 or 0, oh, gotta do it, hate doing this. And I prioritized that entire list based on what was most inspiring and meaningful down to least. And it just so happened that some of the ones that were most meaningful were also the ones that produced most. So that means I couldn't wait to do it, and it also produced the most. So anytime I'm doing anything less than that, I'm undermining my business and undermining my vitality. And vitality is what draws business. If you're not inspired by what you do and enthused about what you're doing and on fire about what you're doing, you're going to hold back your business. I went to the next column, and I prioritized it according to 10 down to 0. Next column, I went, how much would it cost to hire somebody to do that job? To have somebody do that particular job to the same standard as me or greater. Every dollar, not just their fees, their salaries, but their parking, their insurance, their bonuses, their equipment, their depreciation schedule, their space usage, everything. How much would it cost me? And I wrote down all the costs to the best of my ability. And then I looked at the spread between what it produced per hour versus what it would cost per hour to look at where the spreads were. And I prioritized the spreads. So I knew who I wanted to delegate, what I wanted to delegate first all the way to last. Where I could extract surplus labor value out of somebody else and produce the most income with the least amount of effort. And increase the number of employees I had, which means I helped the economy. The next column was how much time do I actually spend on these things so I can coordinate my day. And how often do I do them? And the last one is a final prioritization, factoring in all the variables. When I got through that, it was very clear to me where I was going, what I was going to do, what was going to produce the most income, serve the most clients, make the most income, and allow me to hire the most people and give job opportunities. I then layered that into 10 layers, put a job description for each layer, and hired that individual and that job duty, and put a fee on it and hired it. I didn't get the first person the first time. I had to go through 3 people on the first one, 2 people on the second one. But by the time I did the third one, I had pretty better ideas on how to hire people. I learned never to hire anybody that doesn't have highest on their values what I want to delegate. Because if I have to micromanage them and motivate them extrinsically to get them to do this, wrong person on the bus. Yeah. So I learned to do the value determination on the individuals I'm employing, and to make sure that they could see congruently how this job description is going to help them fulfill their dreams. Because if they can't see it, I'm going to be needing to motivate them and micromanage them. I don't want to do that. Otherwise, I'm distracted from my primary objective. So I did those layers, and from 18 months, from start to finish, from reading that book, from a 970 square foot little office with 1 staff, 18 months later, I had a 5,000 square foot office and 12 staff, 5 doctors, and all I was doing is speaking, working with only the top clients, and training the teams, and inspiring the teams and training them on efficiencies. And my income net was more than tenfold. So I never went back. I never went back to doing anything other than today, teach, research, and write. Boom. I produced millions doing that, hundreds of millions doing that, and I've delegated the rest. So the key is not to do low priority, desperate things. They'll weigh you down. You'll lose your creativity. You'll be in your amygdala. You'll lose your inspired vision. You won't feel on top of the world. You won't be inspired. You won't generate your creative insights and innovative, creative, cutting edge stuff. And you'll be putting out a lot of fires and be reacting instead of acting from a vision. You lose your vision. It's the visionaries, the unborrowed visionaries that are not subordinating to outer authorities, that are becoming the authority because of specialized knowledge, is what leads the pack.
Yeah. Wow. And that is such an awesome exercise. All of us are probably gonna have to go back. I was starting to write it down. I'm like, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this 4 or 5 times so I can practice that, because that exercise sounds like the best way to line out your life plan. And maybe even a sub factor of that would be that you could say, this is exactly how much I want to make in the long term, and gives you a clear path to get there. So I appreciate you sharing that, Dr. Demartini, because that was an inspired piece there. Well, I appreciate you for coming on here and sharing so much wisdom with us, Dr. Demartini. That was really, honestly, such a fantastic interview. We appreciate you coming on, and we ask that anybody who's listening to this, that you go check out drdemartini.com, go get his books, go read through everything that this guy does. Obviously, he knows what he's talking about. So thanks a ton for coming on the show, Dr. Demartini.
Thank you for having me, Josh. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.